welcome to the CEC Report for November 15th. I'm Elisa Barwick and with me is CEC leader Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Elisa.
And in this week's CEC Report, bail-in emerges from the shadows, Obamacare is bail-out plus bail-in for big insurers, and the public good versus private profits. Which does your MP govern for? So firstly, bail-in emerges from the shadows. Now this week, the CEC's long-going bail-in mobilisation hit Canberra. We have reprinted our famous bail-in New Citizen. And Craig, give our viewers a bit of a sense of the impact this had on Canberra.
Yeah. Our intention, Elisa, is to shine a very strong spotlight on this issue for all Canberrians, because a lot of the public service within the financial sector, like the APRA, Reserve Bank, ASIC and the Treasury, all reside in Canberra. And what we found, as we reported in there, that the Financial Stability Board, based in the Bank of International Settlements, said that bail-in legislation is in train for Australia. Now, if you go back to 2010, most people don't realise it, but there was a huge raft of legislation brought in after the global financial crisis. All of this legislation was drafted secretly. It was all put up secretly. It was adopted with very little debate. And now we have these incredible powers that APRA has that they didn't get before with very little discussion.
And this would give our regulators the ability to demand that depositors in the bank have to have their deposits confiscated like Cyprus.
This is what the bail-in represents. So you've got people in secretive positions writing legislation that will be put forward in the Parliament in a very short period of time, we believe, because look, Australia now chairs the G20. The G20 is responsible for the establishment of the Financial Stability Board. The Financial Stability Board has made it clear, particularly its head, Mark Carney, who's also the head of the Bank of England, has made clear that by the time we get to the Brisbane meeting in November next year, they want to have all the necessary key attributes for the resolution of banks passed. So what we've done is put 122,000 copies of the New Citizen into Canberra, into every single household. And we've had a team of 10 people last week go up there and literally distribute another 8,500 copies into all the institutions. And the recognition factor for our work was incredible. I mean, a number of people said, yes, well, I bet if I'm not working on bail-in, I'm reading about bail-in.
Every day.
These
were bureaucrats that were walking into the Treasury Department.
Yeah, so when people think, I've never heard about bail-in, it can't be real, well, that's a bit like this report you hear, this story where a guy goes and get hit by a car, and the only time he realises it's real when he goes inside and watches himself get hit by a car. On the news. Yeah. Right, well, this is what we're talking about. There's a tremendous degree of denial here. I must say that some people are saying they don't trust the banks, and therefore they say, okay, well, maybe they're right. This is not a matter of opinion. We've published in that paper, in black and white, all the evidence necessary for people to see that this is in the intention.
Yeah, it's just probably wishful thinking if people are still denying it. And for those who do need to see it in the media, we had the first little crack of a breakthrough this week where the November 14th Australian had an article headlined S&P, Standard & Poor's, warns of bail-in dangers for lenders. The article begins, the credit ratings of the big four banks and Macquarie Bank could come under pressure if creditors were at risk of taking losses after being quote-unquote bailed in following banking collapses, Standard & Poor's has warned. The article goes on to talk about the model of Cyprus, and I'll just read one quote from the actual Standard & Poor's report. It states, the government support factored into S&P's bank ratings in Australia would likely be negatively affected if S&P believed the Australian government or APRA were likely to establish powers within a resolution process that could see the repayment of creditor principal or interest delayed, or if creditors were likely to take a financial loss as part of the execution of bail-in resolution powers, the agency said.
So they're not even talking about, this is how sensitive this issue is, right? In Cyprus, the intention and the practice was, which has happened, was to steal people's deposits, right? What people have to realise is that depositors are unsecured creditors. So when you see the word creditors, you can think deposits. And that's the trick here. There's going to be all sorts of sophistries brought up by the Hockey government, the Abbott Hockey government, in order to push this through, because this is so unpopular, right? Even the head of the European Union, Mario Draghi, said, shh, don't talk about bail-in until we get these bailout issues solved, because this is so sensitive. I mean, people will riot over this.
Yeah.
And they are actually, they were, in places like Cyprus and so forth, as we saw with the picture on the front page of our newspaper, hands off at deposits. This is an incredibly sensitive issue, because this is, it's simply, again, stealing the livelihoods of people, taking the money away, which is not guaranteed, right? People say, oh, there's a $250,000 guarantee on my deposits. Well, I'm safe. Wake up, peoples. What Wayne Swan said on the 11th of September 2010 was that, oh, look, this guarantee is going to guarantee 250,000 of your deposits. It's going to cover 99% of all deposits. What he didn't say is that 99% of all deposits only covers roughly 50% of the value of all the deposits in the banking system. So I've been talking to counsellors this week, and one particular counsellor says, look, we've got dozens of these accounts, millions of dollars, $18 million in fact invested in all over the place. What happens to those accounts? I basically said, for each of those accounts, one of those in each bank, the first 250,000 is covered.
If you're lucky.
But if you're lucky, 4, 5, 6, 10 million, whatever you got in that account, that's subject to bail-in. And that's exactly what happened to Cyprus. So, and then people worry, they think, oh, well, it's just, they're going to take that bit of money. Well, so what? Well, the problem is in Cyprus, that created a run on the banks, so they slapped on capital controls. Until this day, they can still only take out €300. There's no cheque exchange. There's no MasterCard or Visa card. The entire economy is ground to a halt, huge unemployment and so forth. So the consequences of this policy are catastrophic when it comes to the physical economy. And this is what people don't get with this policy.
There was another reference in the Australian media, albeit brief, this week, which was in the Herald Sun of November 9th. And the headline said, US Fed to get greater powers, Bernanke. And this was referring to, even though the article from the Herald Sun itself didn't actually explicitly mention bail-in, but the greater powers they were referring to are the bail-in resolution powers. And what Bernanke basically said in an IMF speech on the 8th of November was that during the 2008 GFC, it was either bailout or bust for the banks. You had no other option. And that now we must have, and we do have, the ability through the Dodd-Frank legislation in the US to impose losses on the creditors in order to protect financial stability. So he was very open about it. But as you referenced, there has been another class of people, including Mario Draghi, the head of the European Central Bank, saying, shh. And Draghi, in a July 30th letter to the European Union Commissioner, stated that, look, we don't want to use this and we want to keep it completely under wraps until the European Banking Union is completed, which is the end of next year, which around about the same
November, yes.
Exactly, G20 meeting, because there might be a run on the banks. We might see investor flight out of subordinated bank bonds, and of course we'd seen Moody's downgrade our Australian bank subordinated bank bonds earlier this year, in addition to the further threats Standard & Poor's are now making for downgrades, because one of the things that they acknowledged in this Australian article was that the Australian banks are essentially worthless without the government guarantees and the government prospect of bailing out these banks. And if you implicitly take that away by putting in bail-in, a lot of people will pull their money out of the banks. They're going to run.
Well, I think also to complement here in Australia, this week there's been a big debate about whether to increase the debt ceiling up to 500 billion or leave it at 400 billion. There's all sorts of politics being played out here. My question is, the debt ceiling right now, or the Australian debt, is about 270, 260 billion. Why are we taking it to 500? What does Joe Hockey know? What does the Treasury know that we don't know, the public doesn't know, about the state of the global financial system or the Australian economy that would require almost a doubling of the debt ceiling? Now, this is why everyone should be extremely nervous about this question of bail-in and what's going on, is because, look, you're not told. We wouldn't even see the tip of the iceberg. It's still, in terms of what's going on in the global financial crisis, because of what Mario Draghi said. Shh, and don't create a run on the banks.
And likewise, there was an entire Federal Reserve seminar on bail-in, on the subject of bail-in, which was held October the 16th in Richmond, Virginia. And 3 of the top Federal Reserve officials praised the bail-in mechanism, but they made clear they did not want to use it at this stage or even be seen as be expecting to use it. William Dudley, who's one of the Federal Reserve bigwigs, said that uncertainties surrounding the approach of bail-in of a big bank could make bondholders bail out fast, triggering its failure. And like Draghi, he said that bail-in should be backed up also by bailout, so you have a combination of the two to try to hold it together.
Well, where's Glass-Steagall being discussed here? Well, that's what we discussed, right? The only solution to this is to go back to a highly regulated system, have a sound commercial banking system that we need, like we used to have under the Commonwealth Bank, right, until it was basically sold off, where you have your normal deposits, your loans and everything for the commercial, for personal use, and then you separate that out and quarantine the merchant banking, the investment banking, and all the speculative activities that are associated with that side of the banking that's completely polluted and destroyed and made unstable the entire banking system. That's what Glass-Steagall represents. And you don't need bailout, you don't need bail-in. No. The people who lose are those who gamble.
And one top US official is calling for Glass-Steagall, and that's Thomas Hernig, who is the vice chairman of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and he told us, this was actually at the at a 21st Century Glass-Steagall event on October 31, and he answered a question from one of our colleagues over in the US about bail-in and what he thought of it, and he said, look, the only way to prevent bailing out the bail-in is to restructure the big banks beforehand, as I've proposed, namely Glass-Steagall. So there are some people that are pushing in this direction.
And now's the time to do it.
Exactly.
The system hasn't collapsed. I mean, from what we know, maybe it's been covered up, we don't know. But the point is, you can make laws right now and say, okay, we're going to do this, get proactive on the front foot. Where's the political will for that? Well, I think it's still round down the rabbit hole with the ignorance of most politicians. Frankly, I mean, these people don't know what the heck they're dealing with.
But we've got to get the people mobilised around this, because the more that they hound their politicians, at a certain point as the crisis worsens, they won't have a choice.
Yeah.
Now, after the break, we're going to talk about how Obamacare is actually a part of this bail-in/bailout program. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Obamacare is bailout plus bail-in for big insurers. Now, there's 2 aspects of Obamacare, which has just been recently ushered in the United States as the supposed healthcare program, which actually show that it's more about saving the big insurance companies, banks, etc. One is that massive government subsidies will be granted to insurance companies, not to hospitals, but to the insurers, in order to cover the healthcare of poorer Americans, which is a direct government bailout of big insurers like AIG, Prudential, etc. On the other hand, private paying people who don't come into, who don't qualify for subsidies as such, will be paying much higher private premiums, and this is now mandated by law that they have to sign up to one of these programs through an insurance company and pay these higher premiums. Obama had said, oh, if you like your old healthcare plan, you can keep it, period. Now he's saying, no, you can only keep it if it hasn't changed since Obamacare was implemented, etc. So these people are being forced into these new programs, paying higher rates, which is a enforced bail-in of private people's money into these big companies. Now, in this period when the Obamacare website has not been functioning and people can't completely sign up, they've got to ring up and etc., the subsidies that the government will give to the insurers are going to be estimated, and the insurer will play the major role in making that estimate. Now, if what they get as a subsidy is too low, it'll be topped up later by the government. If they're overpaid, the insurers will not have to reimburse that money, which is really wild.
It is wild. I mean, the other extremely dangerous and tragic thing is that because the subsidies are now being paid to the insurance companies and not the hospitals, you are literally seeing the shutdown of hundreds and hundreds of hospitals right across the US, and the layoff of thousands, tens of thousands of health professionals, doctors, nurses and so forth, simply because there's no money to pay them anymore.
Exactly.
Look, we've said, most people have no idea, Elisa, that Obamacare is such a tremendously genocidal policy. This is equivalent to the Tiergarten 4 policy of Adolf Hitler. And this is what Mr. LaRouche, who's in the United States as an American statesman and physical economist, has said many times that Obamacare is the equivalent of Hitler's T4. It's designed on the premise that there is a class of people not fit to live.
And this is why we put the famous mustache on the poster of Obama, which caused conniptions for years.
And this is but the intention of Obama. Look, again, people who watch this program regularly keep hearing about this fact that we talk about the policy, the global policy of the British financial establishment, British oligarchy as we refer or lead, is to reduce the world's population down to 1 billion people. Well, here you have it again. You have it not just from bailing through the banking system, which is going to steal people's deposits as seen in Cyprus, but you have it now by simply bailing in the big insurance companies and literally taking away, physically taking away or kicking off millions of Americans off vital healthcare. No more oncology drugs, right? No more necessary drugs for heart medications. No access to healthcare professionals because their plan was changed.
Yeah, and yet EIR, our Executive Intelligence Review magazine in the US, estimates that the insurers are going to make an extra net profit of $300 billion or so per year based upon Obamacare.
And this is straight looting, it's destruction of the population.
Why have that money going into insurance companies, which are essentially functioning as banks to make profits, when you've got people that can't get health care, people that have been kicked off their cancer treatments, kicked off their health programs that were insuring their treatments, etc.
How different would it be if you had a government, like a Roosevelt government, that acted and said, okay, insurance companies, you're going to toe the line, this is what we're going to do for our people. And you reverse the policy. Well, where's the political will for that? Well, I mean, it's growing in the US. It's being led by the LaRouche organisation because people have to, again, be aware that this is a Nazi policy.
And if you needed extra proof that this is part of the bail-in program that's being pushed globally, remember the talk of G-SIFIs, the globally systemically important financial institutions. Well, during the Russian G20, which went ahead back in, was it April or something, there was a definition of GCs, globally systemically important insurers, and it was demanded that these insurers take on higher loss absorbency requirements. In other words, that basically people will be bailed into these insurance companies in the same way, and that this be adopted by the time of the Australian G20, again November next year.
So it was AIG that was bailed out. Remember, back in 2009, AIG is a large insurer, and they're so connected with the derivatives, international derivatives and speculation trade, which is so tied up with the banking system, that there's no choice but to try and save these institutions.
And a number of those insurers are a part of a group called the Financial Services Forum, which is the group that met with President Obama at the beginning of the government shutdown to demand that they continue bailing out the banks and that they do not go anywhere near Glass-Steagall. And a group of high-level insurers also met with top White House officials on 2 further occasions over the last month to help them iron out the kinks in Obamacare. And this is legislation that many of them actually helped write because the insurers are such a big part of it. But after the break, we're going to talk about the alternatives to this. Welcome back to the CEC Report. The public good versus private profits. Which does your MP govern for? Now, if you live in the electorate of North Sydney and your Member of Parliament is Joe Hockey, the answer to that question may already be clear. but if not, it will be by the end of this segment, hopefully. Now, on the 8th of November, Hockey gave a speech at the Centre for Independent Studies, and at the conclusion of it, and he talked about the G20 meeting and Australia's responsibility to that and so forth and his role. But he said at the end that the coalition knows that wealth and prosperity are created by the private sector. Our approach to government is to do all we can do to unleash the power of the individual and private enterprise. Under the coalition, Canberra must become a facilitator for private sector growth rather than a punitive and unpredictable interrupter at a time when certainty is already fragile. And in an earlier speech in August 2012, Hockey had demanded smaller government and reduction of the size of government programs and entitlements because it leaves, or quote, because it leaves more resources for the private sector to reap the rewards, unquote. Now, this coheres completely with this secret treaty, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, which demands that governments cannot interfere with the rights of financial and corporate interests to make profits. Now, Craig, if this is your idea of government, the government's just there to let the private sector make money, what is the purpose of even having government?
This comes back to what Hockey is saying is, I'm a banker's boy. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Look, who are the biggest profit makers in the economy? It's the banks. 26 billion combined this coming year they're going to make, right? Look what's happening in terms of what would that money do if it was actually, made by the Commonwealth Bank, for example, in the sense of being able to loan that money out into the physical economy. You'd have a booming economy based on the fact that you've got a strong national bank. That's what the Commonwealth Bank used to be, or could have been, more of. What Hockey is saying is that it's going to be private wealth that's going to run the economy, which is never ever the way that you build an economy. The issue comes down to whether you support the idea of a government that supports the general welfare or private profit. Now, this is why you sell it. This is why the coalition will sell everything off, is because it thinks that private profit is more important than general welfare.
And
this is going to be austerity.
Yeah, and they say they want to build infrastructure, which sounds good, but they're going to do it through public-private partnerships, because how can private companies make money, for example, building roads or running a hospital? I mean, these are things that are done for the general welfare. So someone comes out of a hospital being well and being able to work, but the company running that hospital doesn't expect to make an immediate profit out of that.
No, and so with the privatisation of infrastructure, as a clear example, take electricity. Now you've got the absurd case that one person on one side of the road is paying a different rate for the same electricity as a person on the other side of the road, right? You've got this happening all over the country because you've got private companies competing for the same basic infrastructure commodity of electricity. Now, if you had a government-owned utility funded by a national bank so that all the interest, all the necessary infrastructure is funded through national credits, then people could pay the same electricity rate much, much lower, because you're not piling on top of that private profit. So, I mean, that's a different model, and we don't have a huge amount of time to talk about it today.
No.
But maybe we can talk about it in the future.
We'll have more to say about it, that's for sure. Now, people need to go and see their Member of Parliament and actually ask, who are you governing for? And particularly Mr Hockey, he should be hounded by the question, are you governing on behalf of the banks? If so, does that mean you're governing on behalf of JP Morgan and the other big entities that we've exposed as owning all the big four Australian banks, or for us? Now, thanks for tuning in this week, and see you again next week.